This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 172. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 172 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, we are going to be discussing how to start your career in building automation. So this is a topic we've discussed from multiple different angles in the past. We've talked about what to do if you're a mechanic. We've talked about how to get promoted. We've talked about going through interviews. But what if you have absolutely no experience? What if you are working at Walmart right now and you just, for whatever reason, decide you want to get into building automation? Now, a lot of folks would have you believe that that is impossible. They would tell you you need to do years as a mechanic, or you have to have some sort of associate's degree in BAS or whatever. The reality is that is pretty far from the truth. When you really start to think about building automation, at least at the beginning of your career, you're really just doing a set of repeatable actions, and they're pretty easy to define when you start to think about it. And we'll talk through that later in the episode. But if you've been thinking about building automation, or maybe you are a hiring manager or someone leading a ops team, and you're just really struggling to find people, and you've also been led into this belief either by your past experience or just by a bunch of people telling you that you have to go and find these people who have all this experience in order to be able to execute work and be able to use these people on jobs, I will tell you from my experience leading teams and training thousands of people, that is not the case. All right, so today's episode is sponsored by our Building Automation Startup and Checkout course. If you are looking into moving into building automation, or maybe you just hired some fresh green people and you want to get them able to be billable as fast as possible, then BAS Startup and Checkout is the course for you. It goes start to finish through the entire installation process with installation, wiring, checkout, setup, development, everything you would need in order to take a job from literally mounting the controller, wiring up inputs, all the way to setting up graphics, setting up servers, and everything in between. So I encourage you to check out that course at buildingautomationmonthly.com/172. It is the course, and I mean the course, that will prepare you for a career in building automation. All right. So why would you want to move into building automation? Let's kind of answer that question first, because a lot of folks don't know what it is. Now, I assume if you're listening to this podcast and you're a regular listener, I mean, we're at episode 172, I would hope you know what building automation is. Otherwise, that means I've utterly failed in creating this podcast. But if you're new to the podcast, or you just managed to stumble on this from YouTube or LinkedIn or something, well, the reasons why you want to move into building automation, and kind of first off, this is what I tell folks, right? If you think about a Nest thermostat at your house, right? Well, that controls the HVAC systems, and it's a smart, intelligent thermostat. Well, what we do in building automation is kind of like that, but for commercial buildings, hospitals, airports, etc. So the systems are much more complex. The reasons why to move into building automation are plentiful, especially at the time of this recording, which is July 2019. First off is pay. I have made no qualms about the fact that I am highly motivated by money. That's just my personality. It's the reality of who I am, and I'm not ashamed of that. I am a capitalist through and through. So money is plentiful in building automation, especially after the 2-year mark. There is, and I've seen it time and time again in our students, in myself, working with our customers, the pay shift from 0 to 2 years to 2 years and beyond. If you do things right, which we've got other episodes about that, how to make yourself more valuable, and I'll link to those in the show notes. But if you do things right, your pay scale should go from $30,000, $40,000 a year to $60,000 to $80,000 a year in 2 years. I mean, that's a huge jump. That's like a double. And folks are like, how can I do that? I've been stuck at this forever. Like I said, we'll link to an episode that talks about that, because that's a whole nother episode that we've already recorded. Growth opportunities. Building automation has plenty of growth opportunities. I mean, you could do service, you could do programming, you could do design, you could do startup, you could do project management, sales. I mean, it's pretty freaking awesome. If you want to be out working with your hands all day, you can do that. If you want to be in front of a computer all day, sitting in a closet, well, maybe not sitting in a closet, but sitting in the office, you could do that. If you want to be managing projects and financials, you could do that. I mean, it is really limitless what you can do with building automation. The physical strain, let's be real. A lot of mechanics who come to us for training and they say, Phil, we got to get out of building or HVAC. We got to get into building automation. The number one reason they do that is the wear and tear. They're tired of being on roofs. They're tired of being in attics. They're tired of carrying compressors. They're tired of the physical strain, and that starts to wear on you over time. So the physical strain with building automation is carrying a backpack and maybe a controller. I mean, it's not that physically challenging, but on the flip side, it is very mentally challenging. Now, this is not to say that HVAC or any other trade is less mentally challenging. I'm not saying that. I quite honestly think being an electrician or a HVAC mechanic is quite mentally stimulating if you're working on the right systems. But BAS is also very mentally challenging. I mean, trying to figure out protocols, trying to stay up to date with all these different things IT-wise, trying to navigate HVAC sequences and apply them to controls logic. It's almost like adult Lego. So it's a lot of fun and a lot of challenge if you want to be mentally stimulated. And especially if you get in service, you can have different things going on every single day. So then the question goes, Phil, this sounds freaking wonderful, but how do I do it? Well, there's some challenges. Some of these are real challenges. Some of these are just assumed challenges. They're what we've been told. Now, the reality is that there is training out there to take you into building automation. Majority of it, though, has a couple downsides. When we're thinking of trade schools, when we're thinking of the old go and be an HVAC apprentice for 5 years or however long your apprenticeship is, I mean, this is a global podcast, so I'm not going to try to memorize every program that's in the world. But the reality is programs are too long for really what you need to know for your first couple years. I mean, we're talking about doing point-to-point checkout. We're talking about mounting controllers. We're talking about uploading and downloading programs. We're talking about being able to read schematics. This is stuff that doesn't take 4 freaking years to learn. It should take you 2 to 3 months to learn. Now, I know some of you are going to be out there hemming and hawing like, oh my God, Phil said it takes 2 to 3 months to learn building automation. That's not real, blah, 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 blah. Well, the reality is, it is real, and we've got thousands of students who have done it. And the problem is that we're stuck in this paradigm of you've got to do your time. We all did our time, so you've got to do your time. You can't learn fast. The thing is maybe that was true 20 years ago when we didn't have all the mechanisms to learn, but we have feedback loops where we can instantly adjust training as long as it's structured right. We have the ability to access things online on demand, so you can be sitting out at a job site and watch a video again so that you can make sure you're doing things right. The other thing is that a lot of folks who come up with these training programs, they don't know what is actually needed in today's market and what is needed for role-specific applications. So we've got to make sure that programs are structured in order to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of them aren't. Now, as a professional or a soon-to-be professional going and looking for a job in building automation, you need to learn how to research positions. You need to understand, and we'll do this in this episode, how to go and look up job descriptions, understand what's going to be expected from that job description, and be able to prepare. And there's going to be a little bit of unconventional approaches to getting hired, and we'll talk about that later in the episode. Now, it's assumed by many folks that you have to have HVAC, IT, and BAS knowledge. Yet, every day, I meet folks who maybe have one of these or have none of these and are getting hired and are exceeding their managers and their company's expectations. How are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because they are going and focusing on the key tasks that are associated with the position that they researched. They're going and maybe spending a couple $100 on a controller, practicing, and then coming into these roles with very clear expectations of what they're going to do that's going to generate profitability on a job. Because no one is going to get upset with you if you're working safely and generating profit. Because if you're out on a job generating profit, which means you're doing the things right and you're doing it safely, then you are going to be doing well. So that doesn't mean you need to know everything about everything, which is assumed. You just need to know how to do key tasks for the position you're in. Another challenge that is faced by a lot of folks is these lack of standards. There's no real standard as to what a building automation professional is. And then interviews. These are completely hit or miss. Some of them are hands-on. Some of them, people just look at your piece of paper, and if you don't have your Niagara cert or you don't have this or that, they don't hire you. So we'll talk about strategies of addressing that. So the first thing that anyone who is looking to enter this industry needs to do, and this is kind of different than how everyone else approaches this, is to understand the industry and how it fits together. So you got to understand how all of this comes together so that you can go and really relate to the hiring manager, and you can relate to what you're doing on your day-to-day job so that you're doing it right and making right decisions. Because making a decision of whether to do point-to-point or not do point-to-point, or to do a functional test or not do a functional test, or to use this wire over that wire, it comes into play of understanding how everything fits together. So first off, you have to understand why BAS. Why do we use a building automation system? When would we? Would we really want to use a building automation system to control a unit ventilator or a unit heater or just some sort of exhaust fan in a warehouse? Maybe, maybe not. So how do we use building automation? How is it installed? What are the steps? What are the processes? What makes projects profitable? What is profit? I know this is different than what everyone else out there is teaching. A lot of folks are teaching very tactical things. This is how you do this with this controller. This is how you do this exact step with this operating system. But then people get on a job site and things are slightly different and they just aren't able to execute. Also, you want to understand, maybe if you're going to go the service route, what makes service profitable? As it's completely different, and understanding that. Now, I do recommend doing install work before service work. Service work is much less forgiving. I started doing service work first. I feel like it helped me grow, but at the same time, it was very challenging. There were a lot of times I was kind of faking it till I made it because I didn't really know what I was doing. And in retrospect, it would have been a better idea to start install first and then go to service, but it just is what it was at the time. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is this HVAC knowledge. I mean, how do you close that gap? You do need to have some HVAC knowledge in order to work in building automation. Now, I know some of you are like, but Phil, you said you don't need to be a mechanic, Yeah, I still stand by that, but you do need to have some basic fundamental knowledge, and it's not as hard to get as you may think. Now, through all of this, I'm assuming you're mechanically oriented. I'm assuming you have the ability to learn. I'm assuming that you can actually apply yourself and have the grit to study and stay off of whatever people are doing these days and just focus. So if you have that, then closing the gap of HVAC knowledge, there's a couple things I recommend. First off is the Honeywell Gray Manual. As dry as it does a really good job of explaining sequencing. Then as you start to learn about sequencing and how things work, then you can look at some of the Trane manuals, some of their Trane engineering manuals. I think it's I can look it up real quick. What is it called? Trane engineering newsletter, I think. Maybe, yeah, newsletter. I recommend looking at those. They're really good. They've got live programs. They've got newsletters. You can actually learn quite a bit by reading through those. And then finally, there's some YouTube videos that you can watch as well. Now, if you're going and like starting to learn about how compressors work and things like that, and you're probably going a little deeper than you need to go for the beginning of your career, because the reality is the beginning of your career, most of what you're going to be doing is going and setting up point to point, validating that point's work, things like that. And you're not going to be programming things. You are simply going to be validating point to point. You're going to be downloading programs to controllers. You're going to be setting up graphics, that kind of stuff. Now, if you really want to fast track the HVAC knowledge, I encourage you to look at our Control Sequence Fundamentals course. It will teach you everything you need to know about HVAC sequencing, and it's one of our most highly reviewed courses. We've had a lot of people go through it, and almost everyone who's gone through it has said that it was essentially eye-opening. The feedback from them has been that this course teaches you what you need to know about HVAC from a controls perspective. So it's very valuable, and I really encourage you, if you're trying to learn HVAC, to look into that. Now, next up is BAS knowledge, right? So this is where you kind of get what you need to know in order to get hired. So BAS knowledge, like what do you need to know? Well, how I like to do this is I go to the good old Google and I type in like building automation systems technician, right? Let's just type in that. And we'll see, oh, look, there's a systems tech 3. And oh, look, there's, and just things that are popping up on Indeed, right? And so you see these things, building automation technician. This one says 5 years minimum experience. This one doesn't say anything. Oh, this one says 5 years experience as well. But if we look at it, right, it's like low voltage wiring installation and termination, installing and calibration of sensors, starting up valve and damper actuators, troubleshooting line voltage, programming and startup of VFDs, IP and backnet networking, HVAC. I mean, the majority of this stuff is pretty straightforward and pretty simple to do. You just got to train for it. Let's go and look for another one. I want to find one that's like a little more entry level. Here we go. What is this one right here? Building automation technician at Carrier. Let's take a look at this. All right. So implement the startup, commissioning, and recommissioning of customer systems for pneumatic, electrical, electronic technology. Maintain as-built drawings. Calibrate some points. That means doing point-to-point, right? Implementing static and dynamic commissioning of software programming. So that would be making sure your programmings are downloaded and making sure that it's working. Setting up some operator workstations. Doing some backups of databases, managing turnover to service. So this is an install job. Keeping track of projects, keeping PMs managed, or your PM apprised of what's going on. And this is all pretty straightforward stuff. And you can learn this. So let's talk about how we would learn this, right? Let's take a second and talk about like, how would we learn this? I'm sitting across from you and you decide, you see this job posting and you're like, man, how am I going to learn this? Well, I already told you the startup and checkout course is going to take care of pretty much every requirement in here. So I would encourage you to do that. I'd encourage you to buy a controller, invest in a lab. If you're really serious about this career field, it's going to cost you a couple grand. And I know some of you are like, oh my gosh, it's going to cost me a couple grand. But yet, same people are willing to spend $30,000 on a trade school and 4 years of their life not earning an income on what they're actually being trained for. And yeah, some trade schools are 2 years. but you're willing to spend that opportunity cost, that time where you couldn't be making money, and 20 to 30 grand, or you could spend, 2 to 5 grand and in a couple months learn what you need to know. And now you've got 2 years of experience. So now where you would have been salary wise is going to be much higher after doing this, 2-month program versus doing a 2-year program. I hope that made sense. That's more of a visual explanation. I'm like moving my hands around, but that's what really frustrates me is I talk to folks and they're not willing to invest in building a lab for themselves. They're like, oh, it costs too much money, but they're willing to go and spend money on a program, like a 2-year or 4-year program, and sink all that opportunity cost where they could be earning a paycheck. They could be actually earning experience, which, like I told you, that jump from 30 to 40 grand to 60 to 80 grand in 2 years. And man, I'm like, man, if I could just get folks to see that, it would just really help a lot of folks out. Okay. Like I said, we're looking at this job description, and the thing is that everything in here can be learned in a couple months. So then that brings us to, all right, how do we actually go and learn these things in a couple months? If you believe what I said, so the premise is that we can learn what we need for most entry-level building automation roles within a couple months, the next logical question should be how? Well, first off, we have to have stuff to work with. Now, I'm a big fan of recommending going to Control Co. or someone similar to them and buying an EasyIO FW08, I believe it is. So with that controller, you'll get a freely programmable controller that's similar to Niagara in the Sedona framework. It's got a similar wire sheet for block programming. It'll allow you to configure a network on it. It has wireless, it has MSTP, it has BACnet IP. It also has scheduling, trending, alarming. It also has graphics. So for a controller for a lab, it is really good. And it's relatively inexpensive. So I'd recommend you pick up that. And then you can pick up, depending on how realistic you want to get, you could just pick up resistors and potentiometers to simulate inputs. And you could use relays for outputs. Or if you really wanted to get really hands-on, you could pick up some low-cost actuators, some low-cost 1K nickel temperature sensors, and you could actually work with those things. Now, once you have all that, then it's simply a matter of going and testing out the skills that you will be using in that role. So if we look at it again, right, implement the startup, commissioning, and recommissioning of customer systems that utilize pneumatic, electrical, electronic technology. So we're talking about being able to install sensors and being able to validate sensors and actuators and relays and making sure they work. Working with as-built drawing packages in Visio, Excel, or Word. And most of the time you'll be using Visio. Sometimes you'll be using CAD, but most of the time you'll be using Visio. So with that being said, all right, get a copy of Microsoft Office with Visio, and that's fairly inexpensive as well. And then go and look up on Google some job drawings, which are pretty easy to find, and then duplicate those. Start to understand how the drawings are laid out. Now, we have an entire course called Design for BAS Professionals that teaches from start to finish how to create as-built and as well as regular submittal drawings based on project documents. So if you want to learn that in great detail, we have an entire course, but you could, in theory, do this on your own and just get a spec that you find off Google. You just type in building automation spec, building automation MEP drawings, type that in, get the PDFs of those, and then go and create your own submittal drawings based on that. And you may be, okay, well, how do I create those submittal drawings? Well, we've done a past episode on that, but it's quite simply, you just follow a step-by-step process and you build out your network riser, your control diagram, your system diagram. You may be like, Phil, this seems pretty overwhelming. How am I going to learn all this in 2 months? Well, I mean, if you apply yourself, that's why throughout this episode I've been recommending our courses, because they're structured to take you through step by step in the shortest amount of time possible. But if you apply yourself, you can go and with research learn these things. The thing is, most folks won't do this. Most folks aren't disciplined enough to do this on their own. I mean, it's not meant to be disparaging. It's just the reality. Otherwise, we would see tons of folks succeeding in life rather than living lives of quiet mediocrity. I'm going to get off my philosophical box. But following along with this job description, right? Responsible for the calibration of systems, okay? Using basic electronic test equipment such as multimeters, etc. So here we're just doing a multimeter. We're taking a voltmeter, taking resistance, taking amperage, inline. We're measuring those things. We're looking at Wireshark to look at networks. All of these things are fairly easy to learn. Setup of operator workstations, associated software. Once again, if you buy that controller I recommended, you can go and set that all up. You can work with the database with like MySQL. You can do those things. Work with FTP for file transfer protocol. All of these things, there's no reason whatsoever that you can't learn this stuff. Which then brings us to, okay, we learn it. We've determined the important skills, right? We've talked about how we're going to train these skills. How are you going to measure that you've actually done this? How are you going to measure change? Because with any training, as I've learned, I never once thought that I was going to become someone who's running a training business. But as I've learned running a training business, a very successful training business, and really going and helping folks develop their skills, I've learned that there is a process, right? You set a goal, you set a key outcome. All right, in this lesson, we're going to learn this. You know, in the first course I ever created, it was just, all right, I know what people need to know about building automation. I'm going to teach them. And that was the BAS A to Z book. Now, fast forward 2 years, actually 3 years, and courses are completely different. They're learning objectives that are measurable. And so you lay out an objective. You say, I'm going to learn how to do point-to-point checkout. I'm going to learn how to validate a temperature sensor using a multimeter. Okay, so you've put that objective. Then how you measure it is your ability to validate the temperature sensor using the multimeter. So pretty straightforward. So you list out the skills you need on a piece of paper. You list out how you're going to learn those skills, and then how you're going to validate that you actually know them. And then you need to figure out how soon you need these skills, because you're not going to need to know how to set up BBMDs. You're not going to need to know how to program complex central plants as an entry-level technician. You're just not. So once you figure out the skills you need to know and when you need to know them, now we need to start looking at how do we actually get hired. And for a lot of folks, this is the hardest part, but it doesn't have to be. So the worst route you can do is go on Indeed, take your resume and throw it to an HR screener who probably doesn't understand the job you're doing anyways, and they're going to screen you, and you're not going to have the experience, and you're going to get cast out and never hear from anyone. What I like to do is research the building automation companies that are in my area. So research them. Then find out who, and you can do this on LinkedIn, find out who the managers are for the building automation team. And then you connect with them. And then you send them a message and you explain to them what you are doing for personal development. You could say, I saw this position on your site. I know if I apply, HR will screen my resume and say I don't have experience, but here is why you should hire me. And then you go through and you say, I looked at the job description. I went and personally bought my own controls, and I taught myself using whatever resource, and you explain what resources you used to do XYZ. So I went and saw that you have an install tech, and I saw that they need to be able to validate sensors. So I went and bought a controller, a multimeter, and sensors, and I taught myself how to validate those sensors. I also taught myself how to configure those sensors in such and such software. Now, if you approach with that, most people will at least give you a conversation, which is more than you're going to get if you get the HR screening. So once you have that conversation, you explain to them why you want to be in building automation, what you're doing to develop yourself, what your plan is to continue to develop yourself, and how you've identified the skills. And now we're circling back. Remember when I said understanding the industry, understanding how work is profitable? This is where you explain, hey, I understand that being able to do these things is going to make the projects profitable. So I've focused on these skills so that I can come hit the ground running and be billable right away so that I can be generating profit for your business. You know, I know that that sounds uncomfortable to a lot of folks because a lot of us don't think that way, but that's what these managers are thinking. And you will stand head and shoulders from any other candidate, even experienced candidates, by coming in and communicating that way, by explaining, I understand how your business makes money. I understand what I need to do to generate money. And I also know that most people you're going to hire are not going to be billable right away. I've done these things, XYZ, to make myself billable so that when I come in, you will be able to bill me out on jobs right away, start executing backlogs, start generating revenue, so that now, by doing this, I am a good hire. And that is going to be very attractive to hiring managers that are sitting on tons of backlog. Backlog is essentially a job that's been booked and they haven't been able to bill that job. They haven't been able to bill for that money. Because just because you sell a project does not mean you get paid right away. What happens is you tend to get paid as you execute work. And the problem a lot of folks in the industry are facing is that they cannot bill to jobs because they don't have enough people to execute the work. So if you can come in, execute that work safely and profitably, and tell folks and show folks that you can do that, then what's going to happen is you are going to be an attractive hire, even if you are more inexperienced than someone else, because no one else is approaching it this way, and you are going to be a very attractive candidate. That's what's going to set you apart. So you really got to look at this from a different mindset, realize that you only need to know typically what's in the job description. And oftentimes most job descriptions are actually wish lists and are overkill. So don't let them really make you scared. And if you are looking for a program that in the shortest amount possible will teach you exactly what you need to know to get into this career field, then I encourage you to go through our BAS Startup and Checkout course. It will teach you exactly what you need to know. And if you follow along with the course, you will be able to go to a hiring manager. You'll be able to go to an ops team manager and explain and demonstrate, most importantly, how you will be able to contribute to their profitability day one, hit the ground running, be billable, and that is something that is extremely attractive to folks. And the last thing I'll leave you with is this is hard. It takes a being comfortable with putting yourself out there, getting rejected, because some people will reject you. They will have the mindset of, if you don't have what's on paper, you can't possibly be any good, which is a sad thing. I mean, that's their loss. That's not your loss. That's their loss, because they are losing the potential to have someone who is committed to developing themselves and who's committed to putting in the hard work to get better, which I will tell you, as someone who provides training to corporations, there's a good 20% of the students who will sign up who will never do anything. Despite my prompting, despite my team's prompting, despite their manager's prompting, and we end up transferring their courses to a different student who actually wants to engage. And, you know, these are the same folks who will complain that they never got a raise, they're getting skipped over, they're not getting promoted, but yet when the rubber meets the road, they are not putting in the time to get better, and they are getting passed up by people who are willing. So realize that it is not you that is losing out when folks reject you. It is actually the folks rejecting you who are losing out. I really encourage you to have that mindset, because it can be a lonely place when you're going from company to company and trying to get hired and getting rejected. I know that from experience. I got let go in 2007 and had to call around to all the Allerton dealers in the United States, repeatedly being told no until one finally told me yes. And then I ended up moving my family and getting, basically, that was the start of my, hey, I've got to know everything about everything, because I, based on fear, never wanted to be replaced ever again. And that drove me into essentially what started this business. But realize that you are going to get rejected. That's perfectly normal. And as long as you're okay with that, this plan will work. I've yet to have someone who followed this and did not get hired and did not come back to me a year later and tell me, holy crap, Phil, I followed what you said. And then after that, I followed up with continuing to develop myself. And I am in a place where I just can't believe that I'm actually doing what I'm doing right now. I've got story after story after story of folks who have done this, some using our programs, some doing it on their own. And it is something that you can do. So I really encourage you to take these steps, follow this process. It will work. And if you have any questions, by all means, pop into our Facebook group. If you're not there, I really recommend. There's like almost 1,200 people now, and it's very active, and they're all great people who will answer your questions. So I encourage you to go there. And if you have any questions as well, go to our discussion board. And once again, I encourage you to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/172 to be able to learn more about our programs, to get the resources mentioned in this episode, and be able to really just engage with us and our community. Thanks a ton for being here. And in next week's episode, I'm going to be talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to be talking about what it is, how it works. It's going to be a unique episode because I think I'm going to film a video of it and a podcast. So it'll be kind of a hybrid video that I think will be very valuable to all of you. All right, folks, that's it for today. Thanks a ton, and I will talk to you next week. Take care.